The studio lights were brutal that Tuesday evening, the kind of artificial brightness that turns every bead of sweat into a career liability. Matt Whitaker sat in the guest chair with the posture of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. His suit was expensive but slightly too tight across the shoulders, a tell that suggested weight gained quickly in the years since leaving government service. He had that specific confidence that comes from knowing you can say almost anything on a friendly network and face no real consequences. The host had just finished introducing him as former acting attorney general, constitutional scholar, and one of the sharpest legal minds in conservative media. Whitaker accepted the praise with a slight nod that managed to communicate both humility and complete agreement. The segment was supposed to be straightforward. Whitaker would discuss the latest congressional hearing on immigration enforcement, offer his expert analysis, and reinforce the network's preferred narrative about border chaos and Democratic incompetence. It was a script he had performed dozens of times on dozens of similar shows. The money was excellent. The questions were predictable. The audience was guaranteed to agree with whatever he said before he said it. It was the kind of professional arrangement that had made Whitaker a wealthy man in the years since his 18 months of actual government authority had ended. Then the producer's voice came through the host's earpiece with a late addition to the rundown. Representative Jasmine Crockett had agreed to join remotely for a brief exchange. The host's face showed a flicker of uncertainty, but Whitaker's expression transformed into something close to delight. This was even better than a friendly interview. This was an opportunity to educate a freshman congresswoman on national television about how the real world worked. He had seen her in committee hearings, of course. Everyone had. The viral clips, the confident delivery. But Whitaker had spent 3 decades in rooms where real power lived, and he knew the difference between social media popularity and substantive expertise. She was 39 years old. She had been in Congress for barely 2 years. Before that, a state legislator. Before that, a civil rights attorney in Dallas. Impressive for someone of her background, certainly, but this was constitutional law and federal enforcement powers they were discussing. This required depth. The screen split. Crockett appeared in the right frame, sitting in what looked like a congressional office. The lighting was natural, almost understated. She wore a navy jacket and simple jewelry. Her hands were folded on a desk that was just visible at the bottom of the frame. She nodded politely to the host and said good evening in a voice that carried no particular energy in either direction. Whitaker smiled at the camera in a way that he had practiced enough times to seem natural. He had already decided how this would go. The host opened with a question about border policy directed at Whitaker. He took his time answering, using the full rhetorical toolkit he had developed over years of cable news appearances. He spoke about constitutional authority and executive discretion and the Commerce Clause and the limits of congressional oversight. He used the phrase, with all due respect, 3 times while making it clear he had none. He mentioned his 18 months as acting attorney general 4 times in a 6-minute answer, each reference positioned to remind the audience that he had sat in the chair that mattered. When he finally finished, he leaned back with the satisfied posture of someone who had just delivered a closing argument to a jury he knew he owned. The host turned to Crockett's frame and asked for her response. Whitaker's smile widened slightly. This was the moment he enjoyed most. The moment when someone with credentials that looked impressive on paper tried to engage with someone who had actually wielded federal power. He had seen it 100 times. They always started confident. They always ended learning. Crockett's face had not changed at all during his 6-minute performance. She looked at him now through the screen with an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly. It was the face of someone waiting for a lecture to end so the actual work could begin. When she spoke, her voice had that same flat effect, almost clinical. She said that was certainly a lot of constitutional theory for a Tuesday evening. She said she appreciated his passion. Then she said she had a clarifying question about his time as acting attorney general, since he had mentioned it several times, and since it seemed to be the foundation of his expertise on this topic. She asked him to confirm for the audience exactly how he had come to occupy that position in November 2018. Whitaker's smile held, but something shifted in his eyes. It was a strange question. Everyone knew how he became acting attorney general. Jeff Sessions had been forced to resign and Whitaker had been elevated from his position as Sessions' chief of staff. It was public record. It had been discussed endlessly at the time. Why was she asking him to confirm something so basic? He said slowly that he had served as chief of staff to Attorney General Sessions and had been elevated to acting AG when Sessions departed. He said this with the tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should already know it. Crockett nodded once. She said that was partially correct, but she wanted to make sure the timeline was clear for viewers who might not remember. She asked him to confirm that he had never been confirmed by the Senate for any position in the Department of Justice. She asked him to confirm that he had been appointed directly to the acting AG role without Senate confirmation under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. Whitaker's jaw tightened slightly. He said yes, that was the legal mechanism which was entirely constitutional and had been used by administrations of both parties. He said the Vacancies Act existed precisely for this purpose. His voice had lost some of its casual warmth. It now carried the slightly harder edge of someone being questioned on a topic they considered settled. Crockett said she understood that was his legal position. Then she reached off screen and lifted a binder onto her desk. It was dark blue with multiple colored tabs protruding from the right edge. She placed it carefully on the desk in front of her and rested her hand on top of it with the gentleness of someone handling evidence. She said she had the Office of Legal Counsel's formal opinions on the Vacancies Act dating back to 1992. She said she had pulled every opinion that addressed whether someone could serve in a principal officer role without Senate confirmation. She asked if he was familiar with the specific OLC guidance issued in 2003 regarding succession at the Department of Justice. The studio felt different now. Whitaker shifted in his chair. He said he was generally familiar with OLC guidance, but that this was getting into unnecessary legal weeds. He said the bottom line was that his appointment had been reviewed and found constitutional by the relevant authorities. His hand had moved to grip the armrest of his chair. Crockett opened the binder to a marked section. The sound of the paper was clearly audible through her microphone. She said the 2003 opinion specifically stated that positions of such authority and responsibility should not be filled without Senate advice and consent except in the most extraordinary circumstances and for the briefest possible periods. She asked him how long he had served as acting attorney general. Whitaker said 18 months. His voice had risen slightly. Crockett looked directly into the camera. She said no. She said he had served for 3 months. She said from November 7, 2018 to February 14, 2019 was exactly 99 days. She asked him why he had just told the audience 18 months when the documented record showed 99 days. The silence that followed was immediate and total. Whitaker's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His face began to redden from the collar upward, a visible wave of blood rushing to the surface. He looked at the host for rescue, but the host was staring at his notes. 10 seconds. 15. Someone in the control room could be heard breathing into a hot mic. 20 seconds. Whitaker's hand had begun to grip the armrest hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. Finally, he said that he misspoke. He said of course it was approximately 3 months, but that the responsibilities and scope of the role were equivalent to 18 months of normal tenure. He said anyone who understood how the Department of Justice functioned would know that the intensity of those months justified the description. His voice had taken on a defensive quality that had not been there 2 minutes earlier. Crockett's expression had not changed at all. She said she was sure the intensity had been extraordinary. She said she wanted to make sure the audience understood the actual documented timeline because it became relevant to her next question. She turned to a different tab in the binder. She asked him if during those 99 days he had made any decisions regarding the investigation being conducted by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Whitaker's face went from red to a deeper shade that approached purple. He said immediately that he had been fully briefed on all ongoing investigations as acting attorney general and that he had fulfilled his constitutional oversight responsibilities. He said he had acted entirely appropriately and within the scope of his authority. His words were coming faster now, tumbling over each other. Crockett let him finish. Then she said she had not asked whether he acted appropriately. She had asked whether he made decisions regarding the Mueller investigation. She said it was a yes or no question. Whitaker said he had been regularly briefed on the investigation. He said he had consulted with career DOJ officials. He said he had received ethics guidance. He did not say yes and he did not say no. Crockett opened to another tabbed section. She said she had his sworn testimony before the House Judiciary Committee from February 8, 2019. She said on that date he had been asked this identical question under oath. She asked if he remembered what he had testified under oath regarding his involvement in decisions about the Mueller investigation. Whitaker's breathing had become audible. He said he had testified truthfully and completely to Congress. He said his testimony was a matter of public record. Crockett began reading from the document in front of her. Her voice was completely flat, no emphasis on any particular word, just the steady delivery of recorded fact. She read that when asked directly whether he had ever been asked to approve any request or action to be taken by the special counsel, he had answered that the investigation was following its normal course and that he had not interfered. She stopped reading. She looked up. She said that was his exact testimony under oath. Then she reached off screen again and lifted a second binder onto the desk. This one was black. She said she had the redacted Mueller report. She said she had the appendices that documented timeline of key decisions during the investigation. She opened to a marked page. She said Appendix D showed that on January 15, 2019, exactly 41 days before his sworn testimony, 3 senior Mueller team members had requested approval to expand investigative scope to include additional financial records. She said the approval was required to come from the acting attorney general. She said the request was documented as received. She said the approval was documented as granted 5 days later. She asked him who had granted that approval, if not him. Whitaker's hand had begun to shake slightly on the armrest. He said that routine administrative approvals were not the same as interference or direction. He said that any suggestion that he had lied to Congress was irresponsible and slanderous. His voice had gone up nearly an octave. The host was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting papers that did not need shifting. Crockett said she had not used the word lied. She said she was simply trying to understand the discrepancy between his sworn testimony that he had not been asked to approve requests and the documented record showing he approved a request 39 days before that testimony. She said perhaps he had forgotten. She said 99 days was a lot of time and a lot could happen and memories were imperfect. Her tone was so gentle that it took a moment for the audience to register that she had just called him a liar while giving him an exit. The exit required him to admit incompetence instead of perjury. Whitaker stared at her through the screen. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. He said nothing. Crockett waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The silence was different this time. It was not confusion. It was checkmate. She had given him 2 options and both destroyed him. Admit he lied under oath or admit he could not remember critical decisions from a 3-month period he had just inflated to 18 months. There was no third square on this board. She broke the silence herself. She said she had one more document she wanted to share with the audience before they moved on. She reached off screen a 3rd time. What she lifted into view was not a binder. It was a letter on official congressional letterhead. She said this was a formal request she had submitted 6 weeks ago to the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General. She said the request asked for a full review of all decisions made by Acting Attorney General Whitaker during his 99 days in office and a comparison of those decisions against his sworn testimony to Congress in February 2019. She said she had submitted this request because she had reviewed the public record and found what appeared to be multiple discrepancies. She said the IG had confirmed receipt and opened a preliminary inquiry. Whitaker's face had gone from purple to gray. He said this was a political witch hunt. He said he had served his country honorably. He said she had no right to question his integrity when she herself was a junior member of Congress with no meaningful experience in federal law enforcement. His voice was shaking now. The control was gone. Crockett let him finish. Then she said she actually had a question about that since he had just referenced her qualifications. She said he had opened this interview by noting her relative inexperience and her background as a state legislator and civil rights attorney. She said he had used that framing to suggest her views on constitutional law should be given less weight than his. She asked him to confirm for the audience what his legal experience had been before becoming chief of staff to Jeff Sessions. Whitaker said he had practiced law for over 2 decades. He said he had served as a U.S. attorney. His voice had steadied slightly, grateful for the change in subject. Crockett nodded. She said yes, he had served as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa from June 2004 to November 2009. She asked him what his primary area of legal practice had been before that appointment. Whitaker hesitated. He said he had worked in a law firm in Iowa. He said he had handled various matters. Crockett said she had his professional biography. She said before his political appointment as U.S. Attorney, he had spent 3 years as a private practice attorney handling primarily agricultural contract disputes and rural property cases. She said that was valuable experience, but it was not constitutional law. She said after he left the U.S. Attorney position, he had spent 4 years on the board of World Patent Marketing, a company that was shut down by the Federal Trade Commission and fined nearly $26 million for fraudulent practices. She asked if he had resigned from that board before the FTC action or after. Whitaker did not answer. He was gripping both armrests now. His breathing was ragged. Crockett said she had the FTC settlement documents. She said his name appeared on corporate filings as a board member until 17 days after the FTC filed its complaint. She said 17 days was an interesting timeline because it suggested he had remained affiliated with a company accused of defrauding military veterans and senior citizens until the fraud became a legal liability rather than just a moral one. She asked if that timeline was accurate. Whitaker stood up. The movement was sudden enough that it startled the host. He ripped the microphone clip from his lapel with enough force that the wire snapped audibly. He said this interview was over. He said he would not sit here and be slandered by someone who had no understanding of how the real world worked. He said she was twisting facts and ignoring context and conducting a partisan hit job. His voice was nearly shouting now. The host was saying his name, trying to calm him, but Whitaker was already walking off the set. The camera caught him disappearing into the hallway behind the studio. The host stared at the empty chair. Crockett remained completely still in her frame, hands still folded on her desk, expression unchanged. The host scrambled to cut to commercial, but not before the audio caught him asking the control room what the hell had just happened. When they came back from break, Crockett was gone from the split screen. The host delivered a brief statement saying technical difficulties had cut the segment short and they would return to the topic another time. He did not mention Whitaker by name. He moved immediately to a pre-taped package about unrelated news. What happened in the hours after the broadcast was documented in real time across social media. The clip of Whitaker standing and ripping off his microphone hit Twitter within 8 minutes. By the 1-hour mark, it had been viewed 400,000 times. By morning, it had cleared 6 million. The comments were brutal and consistent. Lawyers posted screenshots of the Mueller report appendix Crockett had cited, confirming the January 15th request. Former DOJ officials confirmed that such approvals required direct action from the acting AG. Ethics experts noted that if Whitaker had approved investigative actions and then testified he had not been asked to approve requests, the discrepancy was not semantic. But the detail that drove the most sustained engagement was something quieter. Multiple viewers went back through Whitaker's cable news appearances over the previous 18 months. They found that in 47 separate interviews across 6 different networks, he had referenced his time as acting attorney general. In 41 of those interviews, he had described it as lasting more than a year or used phrasing that suggested extended tenure. In 16 interviews, he had explicitly said 18 months. No one had ever corrected him before. No one had brought receipts. The Office of Inspector General at the Department of Justice declined to comment on whether they had opened an inquiry based on Crockett's request. They also declined to deny it. 3 weeks after the Newsmax interview, Whitaker quietly withdrew from 2 scheduled congressional testimony appearances, citing scheduling conflicts. The committees did not reschedule. Newsmax did not invite him back. Neither did several other networks where he had been a regular guest. His booking agent released a statement saying he was taking time to focus on private legal work and would be reducing his media commitments. The shows that had relied on him as their go-to legal expert began booking other former DOJ officials. His name still appeared in conservative legal circles, but the invitations came less frequently. The fees dropped. Someone who had been in 12 green rooms a month was now in 2. The thing that haunted him, according to sources who worked with him in those following months, was not even the confrontation itself. It was the arithmetic. 99 days. He had lived through those 99 days. He knew exactly how long they had been. He had inflated them into 18 months so many times on so many shows that he had apparently started to believe his own construction. And no one had ever called him on it because no one had bothered to count. She had counted. She had opened a calendar and counted the days and brought the number to national television and used it to build a cage he could not escape. The legal community watched the clip with a different kind of interest. This was not a viral takedown built on clever rhetoric or emotional appeal. This was structural. She had established a false statement, documented it with his own words, compared it against the public record, introduced a pattern of similar discrepancies, and then revealed an official investigation into those discrepancies, all in under 12 minutes of airtime. It was prosecutorial method applied to a cable news confrontation. Several law schools added the clip to courses on effective cross-examination. The timeline she had constructed became a teaching example of how to build a record that left no exit. Matt Whitaker had entered that studio on a Tuesday evening as a respected former acting attorney general, a constitutional expert, and a man whose credentials commanded deference from people like Jasmine Crockett. He had left 99 days later. That was not a metaphor. That was the actual timeline of his collapse. From the moment she asked him to confirm how long he had served to the moment he ripped off his microphone and fled the set was exactly 99 seconds. Someone had timed it. The symmetry was almost too perfect to be accidental. Jasmine Crockett did not comment publicly on the incident beyond a brief statement thanking Newsmax for the opportunity to discuss congressional oversight responsibilities. She did not do a victory lap. She did not post the clip to her own social media. She simply returned to her work on the Oversight Committee, where she continued to ask specific questions, supported by specific documents, and wait for specific answers. The binders were always there. The tabs were always color-coded. The page numbers were always correct. She had been underestimated her entire career by men who believed that credentials from the right schools and years in the right rooms were the only forms of authority that mattered. She had learned to let them establish that belief completely before introducing them to the alternative. The final detail that closed the loop came 4 months later. The Department of Justice Office of Inspector General released its semi-annual report to Congress. Buried in the appendix on page 241 was a single line noting that the office had completed a preliminary review of decisions made during the tenure of Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker and had forwarded its findings to the appropriate oversight entities. The report did not specify what those findings were. It did not need to. The fact that findings existed and had been forwarded was enough. Whitaker released no statement. His attorney released no statement. The silence was complete. Representative Crockett was asked about it during a town hall in Dallas. Someone in the audience mentioned the IG report and asked if she felt vindicated. She said vindication was not the goal. She said accountability was the goal. She said when someone serves in a position of extraordinary public trust and then inflates their tenure, misrepresents their actions, and testifies inconsistently before Congress, the appropriate response is not vindication, it is documentation. She said she had documented what needed to be documented, and the appropriate authorities had reviewed it, and she trusted they would do what needed to be done. Then she moved to the next question, but before she did, she added one more sentence. She said that at the start of that Newsmax interview, the former acting attorney general had questioned whether a 2-term congresswoman from Texas with a background in civil rights law had the expertise to discuss constitutional matters with someone of his experience and credentials. She said she hoped the record now showed that expertise is not about where you started or how long you served. It is about whether you did the homework. She said she always did the homework. Then she smiled for the first time in the entire answer and called on the next questioner. The audience laughed, but it was not a comfortable laugh. It was the laugh of people who had just watched someone explain in the gentlest possible terms that she had destroyed a man's career because he had made the mistake of assuming she had not prepared. Matt Whitaker had walked into that studio believing he was the authority in the room. He had left understanding that authority is not given by titles or tenure. It is earned by showing up with the receipts when someone demands to see them. Jasmine Crockett had shown up with 3 binders, a timeline, an IG referral, and the patience to let him incriminate himself with his own inflated numbers. 99 days, 18 months. The gap between those 2 numbers was the gap between reputation and reality. She had measured that gap with a calendar and a public record and presented it on live television in a way that left no room for deflection or defense. That was not a viral moment. That was a masterclass in preparation meeting opportunity. And the man who had questioned her qualifications at the beginning never got the chance to question them again.